expanding upon Pillar's 2015 definition of language ideology, I would like to add that language ideologies are not inherently negative nor positive. A language ideology can take form in the sense that someone believes that all languages are equal and that all dialects are equal and they have a place in society. Whereas there can be the language ideology that there is a hierarchy between languages and that certain languages are better than others, that certain languages are appropriate for certain spaces and places. And so, yes, language ideologies are not inherently negative nor positive. I guess I can give two examples of language ideologies. Here in the U.S., there is a language ideology that in the U.S., English is the language of this land, and that everyone should speak English here in the U.S. When in reality, legally speaking, the U.S. does not have an official language. Another example of a language ideology is that in school, there should be a certain way that students and teachers speak. And that can be viewed as the standard language. And this ideology is very much prevalent in most cultures and societies. And that is why it's important to think about language ideologies when it comes to education, because it affects the way in which children are taught. It shapes the way that students take exams. And this can really shift the trajectory of certain students' lives if they don't fit into this mode of a way of speaking a certain language. And that directly relates to what I'm interested in doing in the field of linguistics and applied linguistics. I am interested in working in language education policies and work that supports immigrants, refugees, and migrants here in the U.S. Here, specifically in the U.S., there's this perception that academic English or standard English must be used in the classroom. And that consequently has affected minority children here in the U.S. for a very, 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 very long time. In this class, we learned about the King case, which was a court case where mothers of African American children sued a school in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and the Board of Education in Ann Arbor, Michigan, because they realized that their children were being systematically oppressed and singled out because of their blackness and their usage of African American English. And what ended up happening was that teachers, white teachers, had this language ideology that African American English was inferior to that of standard English, and that the students who spoke African American English had some type of cognitive defect, which then led for them to then place these children into remedial classes. And the parents recognized this, saying like, wait, why are all of the black children, why are our children in these remedial classes? And basically the parents went to court and they had the support of linguists who argue that African American English is not some invalid way of speaking, some lesser way of speaking, and that it is its own language that is as linguistically complex as any other variation of English. But with that being said, the language ideologies and perceptions of the teachers influenced um, the children's education, because they were put into classes that didn't give them what they needed and could have possibly restricted them. And these things have happened across the board around the nation, and actually are still happening to this day. And that can essentially affect the trajectory of Black children's lives, their education, and their lives. Being placed into remedial classes can place like a stigma on the child's back. They don't have as much access to resources and as much access to content. They're not placed in regular classes with the other students. And then how will they be able to go to college or pursue something that is viable to them? Also, being placed in these classes can affect the way they perceive themselves. They may think that they are less intelligent. That connects with language socialization as well. And in relation to immigrants, refugees, and migrants here in the US, because there is this perception or this language ideology here in the US that standard English is the English that students need to speak in schools, and that if they don't have that language, they will not be academically successful. There is this thing called the Home Language Survey that basically has been put into place after the 2001 No Child Left Behind Act, where this survey is used to basically identify students who need additional resources or support in their English. And it's not doing that great of a job, because essentially minority children are being singled out for being exposed to other languages other than English in their home. And there's just a perception that, oh, if another language is being used at home or they're hearing another language, then they won't be able to do well in school. And that in order for them to do well in school, academically speaking, they need more support in English, when that is not necessarily the case. And unfortunately, a lot of times what ends up happening because of these language ideologies is that the students who are placed into these remedial English classes are sometimes lifers in these English language classes, like these limited proficiency English language classes, where they can never test out. And that essentially influences what they can do after they graduate. There are countless cases where students were misplaced in these classes because their parents spoke another language at home, and that then influenced whether or not they were able to apply directly to college after graduating high school, because they hadn't taken enough courses that would allow them to apply to certain colleges in certain states, which meant that some students would actually have to go to community college right away. Not saying that that's a bad thing, but it does shift the trajectory of their education, possibly their lives. If they grow up thinking they don't speak English or good enough English, that can be internalized, and they can think, just like African American students, that they don't belong in certain spaces. And so language ideologies are really important, and I hope to dismantle these types of language ideologies within the U.S. education system, specifically in regards to the Home Language Survey that is used in each state, because I want to ensure that all children have equal access to education, and that we actually shift the narrative on multilingualism, and we start to believe that and think that and implement like education policies and teaching strategies that actually promote multilingualism and bilingualism in our classrooms. That is something that I hope to deal with in the future. And so that is how language ideologies are very important to me and connected to me, because I hope to basically do work that influences the lives of immigrant and refugee and migrant communities here in the U.S. And one way in which I hope to do that is within education policy and standardized testing.